لأن الإسلام دين، ولأن الإسلام يريد أن يحمل الناس على اتباع عقائده واتباع ديانته، وهو ما لا يتلائم والحرية التي تعطيها الديمقراطية للإنسان، فضلا عن كون التجارب العديدة التي سبقت ثورة 2011 تؤكد بشكل يكاد يكون قطعيا أن الذين أعلنوا كونهم إسلاميين ومارسوا الحكم مارسوه في النهاية باستبداد، والأمثلة كثيرة تدل على ذلك من مشرق العالم الإسلامي إلى مغربه، كلها تؤكد أو جلها أن الإسلاميين في كثير من الأحيان قد فشلوا في التوفيق بين انتسابهم الإسلامي وهدفهم الديمقراطي.
So to answer the question as to whether or not Islamists can succeed in politics, the preponderant majority of answers incline towards the position that democracy and Islam are incompatible. The reasoning goes as follows. Islam is a religion which by its own internal mechanism protects its own beliefs and creedal articles of faith, and this is incompatible in its very essence with the freedom and democracy that is guaranteed, that is guaranteed to humans through the democratic process. Moreover, the political events in the Arab world after 2011 almost confirm with beyond any doubt that Islamists who entered the political arena became oppressive and exploitative, and we see cases of this from east to west, and from east to west within the Islamic world, and all of these cases seem to reinforce that Islamists have failed in their attempt to engage in a constructive way in politics.
هذا الانتباه الظاهري الذي كنت أتحدث عنه هو في الحقيقة وعند البحث يبقى انطباعا غير مؤسس، ومجابهته بالنصوص التاريخية والنصوص الشرعية والواقع المسلمين يفنده. أولا لأن الإسلام في تصوري وإن كان دينا فإنه فرق في التعامل بين مساحتين اثنتين من حياة الإنسان. مساحة الأولى هي علاقته بربه من حيث عقيدته ومن حيث طقوس العبادة التي يؤديها، وهذا الجانب أعلن الإسلام فيه أن لا إكراه في الدين، وجعله قضية قائمة على القناعة الذاتية التي لا يمكن أن يتدخل فيها حاكم ولا محكوم، بل إن هذه القناعة الذاتية هي عينها التي يرغب الإسلام كدين في تأسيسها، ليشعر الإنسان بأنه إذا اعتقد أمرا فإن ما اعتقده بقناعة منه واختيار، وأنه عند محاسبته أو مؤاخذته لا يكون مؤاخذا إلا بما اعتنق عن طيب خاطر وقناعة ذاتية. المجال الثاني هو مجال الترتيبات الاجتماعية والاقتصادية والعلاقات الداخلية في المجتمع، وهذا الجانب وإن كان يخضع لقواعد أخلاقية في التعامل يجب تأسيسها على تلك العقيدة، فإنه يبقى جانبا قائما على اختيار الناس الذين يريدون تطبيقه عليهم، وهو الذي قال فيه الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم: أنتم أعلم بأمور دنياكم. والذي يثبت ذلك
So, the claim that Islam and politics are incompatible after scrutiny turns out to be an unfounded claim. Unfounded because the juridical and legal texts of Islam and the texts of legal theory in Islam confirm that Islam and politics can coexist very effectively. The reason for this is that Islam demarcates very clearly between two separate domains. One is the domain of personal belief and creed, and the second is the domain of social interactions. With regard to personal belief and creed, this is confirmed by the Quranic verse that there is no compulsion in religion. La ikraha fi din. This explicit verse implies that no politician can interfere in the personal belief that is held by each and every individual Muslim. So Islam, in fact, comes to confirm the personal beliefs, this first domain. The second domain, that of social interactions, is informed by what he called akhlaq, that is to say, ethics, Islamic ethics, and it is informed as well to a certain degree by belief. However, it maintains its own autonomy because the Prophet himself said, "Antum a'lamu bi umuri dunyakum," you are more knowledgeable of the affairs of your world than I am. This is in the context where the Prophet was asked about some agricultural technique, and he gave the wrong advice, and the agricultural harvest turned out to be completely failed, and the farmer came back and said, "Why are you giving me the wrong advice?" And he says, "You know better about the affairs of your own world." And so for the Shaikh, this confirms the fact that the social and political arena can have a separate domain within Islam.
وإذا أخذنا مثالا للحديث، المجال السياسي ومجال الحكم، فإننا يمكن أن ندرك بأن الإسلام لم يفرض نظام حكم محددا، وإنما قرر مبادئ أساسية لنظام الحكم. هذه المبادئ قائمة على احترام كرامة الإنسان، على الشورى، على إقامة العدل، وترك الخيارات الجزئية للناس يختارون ما يشاءون ليكيفوا الالتزام بهذه القواعد الأصولية بالشكل الذي يجعلهم أصحاب القرار في تنظيم حياتهم. أنا أعلم أن مجال الحديث لا يتسع لخطاب مثل هذا، لأن هذا الخطاب يحتاج إلى تقديم مؤيدات عليه من النصوص القرآنية والحديثية، لكني أكتفي بالإشارة لأنتقل إلى ملاحظة ثانية، هي أن تاريخنا نحن معاشر المسلمين لم يشهد في الحقيقة تمظهرا لحرية المسلم في اختيار حكامه وأن يساس بالقواعد الإسلامية التي ذكرت إلا في فترة قليلة جدا لم تتجاوز حياة الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم وحياة الصحابة الأربعة الذين تبعوه في الحكم، أو بعض فترات مضيئة في التاريخ الإسلامي. أما جل التاريخ الإسلامي فقد اكتنفه حكم ملكي قائم على الوراثة لا يعتبر للمسلم ولا للمواطن حقا في اختيار حاكمه، ويبدو أن هذا الواقع هو الذي جعل الكثيرين يتشككون في قدرة الإسلاميين على أن يقيموا نظاما يبرز التزامهم بالديمقراطية.
So with regard to the political domain, or the domain of rulership, I must emphasize that Islam does not force or specify a specific mode of governance by which Muslims must live. The general principles, of course, are laid out very clearly. The principle of justice, of mutual respect, of shura council. Humans can determine the specific modes of their governance in light of the principles, the general political principles laid out by the Quran, the Muslim revelation, as well as the model set forth by the Prophet Muhammad. Now my lecture is much too short, my time is too short to discuss the intricacies of this political domain, which would take us into Quranic verses as well as prophetic reports. But I will make the remark that Islamic history that Muslims in Islamic history have only had a real genuine voice in determining the governance, the political form of governance under which they live in the very early prophetic period, when the Prophet Muhammad was ruling in Medina in the 7th century, as well as the period where his 4 rightly guided companions were ruling, the caliphs Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. And there are a few luminous exceptions to be found in the 1400 year of Muslim history, but for the most part, the political rulership within Islamic history is monarchic. It's based upon family lineages and rulership from father to son. And this is precisely the reason why people doubt in the ability of Muslims to be able to establish a genuine democratic synthesis with Islam.
في بداية السبعينات بتونس بدأت تتشكل حركة إسلامية شبابية مؤسسوها اليوم شيوخ، وهذه الحركة أرادت أن تخرج من الإطار الإسلامي التقليدي لتتعامل مع النص مباشرة، وبذلك برزت بين الحركات الإسلامية في العالم الإسلامي بكونها حركة تقدمية تمسكها بالعقيدة والدين في أصوله لم يمنحها من أن تبدي آراء تقدمية في شأن الحكم، فبدأت تتحدث عن الديمقراطية والتداول على الحكم وحق غير المسلمين في أن يسوسوا الدولة الإسلامية بحكم المواطنة، وحق الشيوعيين في أن يكونوا على رأس دفة الحكم في بلد جل سكانه مسلمين إذا كان الشعب قد اختار ذلك. وبدأت تتحدث عن حقوق المواطن الأساسية وحقوقه الشخصية، حق التعبير وحق الاعتقاد وحق التنظم، وتريد أن تؤصل لذلك من القرآن والسنة بالشكل الذي جعل هذه الحركة في رصيد 40 سنة تقدم مدونة جديدة تتعامل من خلالها مع الواقع البشري منطلقة من إسلاميتها، لكنها في الآن نفسه متمسكة بمعاصرتها.
In the early 1970s, an Islamic movement began to take shape, and it was led by youths who are today old men. And this movement, which began in Tunis in the 1970s, wanted to part ways with the outmoded ways of thinking Islamically. He's using the word taqlid, which means the emulatory ways, being completely bound to the precedent of Islam without thinking progressively. And so this movement sought a progressive outlook, which at the same time was able to cling to the very fundamental principles that define the Islamic tradition without betraying the Islamic tradition. So this Islamic movement cherished democracy, civil society, or for instance the right of Marxist politicians to be at the head of a Tunisian government if the Muslim population of Tunis are in agreement with the position that is given to these Marxist politicians. This Islamist movement began to discuss freedom of speech. And in all of this, it was grounded solidly in Quranic and prophetic examples. And so they put forth a new discourse that is at once progressive and forward-looking, and at the same time bound by the principles broadly outlined in the Islamic tradition.
لأجل هذه القناعات اختارت هذه الحركة بعد اختيارها بنسبة مريحة من المواطنين بتونس، اختارت أن لا تتفرد بالحكم وأن تدخل مع حزبين علمانيين آخرين لتبرز للناس وأنها قادرة على أن تتواجد مع من يخالفها إيديولوجيا، لأن مصلحة البلد تقتضي ذلك، ولأن قناعتها في أن الإسلام لا يقصي الغير، وأن الإسلام يسمع الغير. وهذه الحركة تنازلت في كثير من القضايا التي يعتبرها بعض الإسلاميين أصولا أساسية لأسلمة المجتمع، فاختارت أن تساهم في تشكيل دستور وأن تدفع إلى وقوع انتخابات، وهي الآن تفضلت بأن تتخلى عن الحكم لمصلحة الوطن في انتظار أن يقع تهيئة فترة انتقالية ينتقل إليها المجتمع التونسي لإقامة نظام ديمقراطي مستمر. أعلم أن هذه المهمة صعبة بالنسبة للإسلاميين أو لغير الإسلاميين، وأن الصف الإسلامي المعتدل يلقى مقاومة إما من علمانيين يريدون إقصاء الإسلاميين من الحكم، أو من سلفيين أو من يدعون أنهم سلفيون يريدون أن يقدموا نموذجا ماضويا لحياة الناس، فلا يرغبون في انتخابات ولا يرغبون في مؤسسات ولا يرغبون في تداول على السلطة. الذي أريد أن أنتهي عليه أن الحركة الإسلامية في تونس ملتزمة التزاما مبدئيا ثم التزاما مصلحيا بإقامة نظام ديمقراطي تشارك هي في إقامته، سواء كانت في الحكم أو كانت في المؤسسات المجتمعية وفي المجتمع المدني. اليوم تعيش هذه الحركة صعوبات، وأول هذه الصعوبات أن الأمثلة التي حولها من الربيع العربي بدأت تتهاوى واحدة بعد الأخرى، ولم يبقى إلا مشهد صغير في تونس، البلد الذي بدأت فيه هذه المحاولة، يبقى هذا المشهد الصغير تنصب عليه الإكراهات من كل جهة لإفشاله، لأن هناك فكرا متمسكا بالماضي، متمسكا بالتخلف، متمسكا بالدكتاتورية، لا يرغب في أن العرب يمكن أن يعيشوا في نظام ديمقراطي، ويريد أن يفرض أن يكون الانتساب للإسلام مقرونا بالاستبداد. لكن الذي أثق به أن شباب الأمة العربية والإسلامية الذي خرج جزء منه في الربيع العربي ليعبر عن إرادته، هذا الشباب يعبر عن استعداد العالم العربي لدخول مرحلة جديدة من حياته، هي مرحلة تفاعل الشعوب مع القيم العالية التي تكرم الإنسان والتي تعزه. هذا العمل صعب، يحتاج وقتا، والتغيير لن يكون تغيير سنة أو سنتين أو 10 سنوات أو 20، والمحاولات التي أجهضت في العالم العربي لا تعبر عن فشل، وإنما تعبر عما يحصل من وجع قبل الولادة. لا ولادة إلا بوجع، إلا بتعب، والنساء يعلمن ذلك. ونحن نقول إن ولادة الأمم تحتاج إلى التضحيات، وإن ولادة القيم تحتاج إلى تعب، لكنها تحتاج إلى صمود لدى الشعوب، والشعوب الرابحة هي الصامدة، خاصة إذا كان شبابها ونساؤها وفتياتها في المقدمة. أشكركم على الاهتمام، والسلام عليكم.
Okay, so a big thank you to... Oh, sorry. Sorry.
So the Shaikh was explaining that the 1970s movement, which began in Tunisia, was firmly anchored in a belief in democracy and in civil rights and in the right of opposing opinions, and in the ability of Muslims to engage within the political arena. And on account of these firm convictions, the movement, which had a fair amount of support from the Tunisian population, joined hands in the political arena with 2 other secular political parties with which they had enormous amounts of ideological disagreement. But the fact that this movement actually joined hands with them testifies to the fact that this movement believes in the principle of difference of opinion. And this Islamist movement chose to consciously to contribute to the political events of its day and in actually drafting a constitution for Tunisia. And it even chose to step down from power in the interim period that Tunisia is going through in order to establish a more abiding democracy within Tunisia. I know that this is difficult for both Islamists and non-Islamists alike, but we are prepared for the sacrifice. Moderate Islamist movements represented by the Shaikh are faced, on the one hand, face the criticism of more hardline Salafists, and he puts Salafists between quotation brackets because they do not claim, he does not believe that they are actually reflecting the pious predecessors that they claim to be. The Salaf means pious predecessors, and he's saying these so-called followers of the pious predecessors. The moderate Islamists take criticism from them on the one hand, who want to disengage from the political arena altogether, and who do not believe in the political process to begin with. And on the other side, they face the criticism of secular politicians. Now, to conclude, the Islamist movement and the political events in the Arab world overall are going through enormous amounts of hardship. To begin with, many of the incipient cases where we saw the rise of a new democratic process, for instance in Egypt and Yemen, are falling right and left. And the only man left standing, so to speak, in this Arab Spring is small little Tunisia, which is victim of many fingers pointing at it and criticism, and victim of hate in many ways. And one of the main reasons for all the criticism was the Tunisian efforts are undergoing is that there is a streak within Islamic society that is anti-democratic and also backward-looking. And I salute the youth of the Muslim community who took to the streets to express their readiness for the Arab world to enter into a new stage which gives honor to humanity as a whole. This is extremely challenging. It will take more than 10 or 20 years for the full transition into democracy. But the failures of Arab Spring are growing pains, or in his, for a more literal translation, is the pain of giving birth. Because, as he put it, there is no birth without pain. And the birth of a new nation and of a community as a whole entails an enormous amount of sacrifice, as women know very well who give birth. And those nations that are triumphant ultimately are those which are most enduring and steadfast. Thank you very much.
أنت خيبت أملي لأنهم قالوا لي عنك أنك تترجم في دقيقتين ما أقوله أنا في 20 دقيقة.
I said I let him down because what he could, he was told that I could translate in 2 minutes what he could say in 20.
You did an excellent job.
So thank you to Mr. Abdelfattah Mourou and to Mr. Casewood who did the translation. Next we're going to hear from Dr. Radwan Masmoudi, who is the founder and president of the Center on the Study of Islam and Democracy, which he started here in DC. It's a DC-based think tank that works to promote democracy in the Muslim world. And Dr. Masmoudi is actually an MIT graduate. He got his PhD from MIT, and he is currently the editor of the Muslim Democrat, the center's main publication. As soon as the Arab Spring happened, he went to Tunisia, where he started another branch of his center, and he works to promote, to facilitate discussions between and among scholars, Muslim leaders, and politicians in Tunisia. So Dr. Radwan Masmoudi.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much to Yale University and the students of Yale for inviting me and inviting Shaikh Mourou for this lecture and discussion. I'll try to be very brief and not take more than 10 or 15 minutes at most, so we can have some time for questions and answers and discussions. What I really want to talk about is why Tunisia matters, why what's happening in Tunisia, which is a small country in North Africa, is really, really important and critical for the region and also for the whole world and for the United States. For the past at least 20 or 30 years, if not longer, Middle East experts and scholars have been lamenting the lack of freedom and democracy in the region, in the Arab region, the Arab world. More generally in the Islamic world, but let's focus on the Arab region for now. And have demonstrated through many reports and many studies that the oppressive and corrupt nature of these regimes in the Arab world is and was the main reasons and the main causes for the rise of violence and extremism and terrorism. This is well documented, it's well known that these regimes have prevented their societies from normal, healthy debates and discussions and participation in political and public affairs, and that this is what gave rise to thousands of young people being frustrated, being angry, and being willing to use violence against the regime, against themselves, against others, in a sign of frustration and desperation. There were even people who said that maybe the Arab world and the Arab people don't really want democracy or don't really care about democracy. It took a long time to try to convince people that this was not true, that people in the Arab world do indeed want democracy and believe in freedom and believe in democracy. Until, of course, and we tried very hard. The center is about 15 years old. We were established in 1999. We tried very hard to convince US policymakers to stop supporting these dictators. For the last 40 or 50 years, the policy of the United States was to support these dictators in the name of stability. That by supporting these dictators, we are providing stability and maybe perhaps development to the region. And of course, this was not true. There was no stability and there was no development in the region. And if you know any of these countries in the region, you know that what I'm talking about. There was no stability and there is no real development in these regions. So we tried to convince, and many experts and many scholars tried to convince the whole world, but of course we're talking about the United States here, that it is wrong to support dictators, that this was not in our interest to support these dictators in the Arab world, and that we needed to support democrats and real democracy in the region. But of course, the regimes in the Arab world refused to adapt or to modernize or even to open up their systems. They remained closed and they remained authoritarian until the very last minute. In Egypt, we know what Mubarak did, in Tunisia, Ben Ali, and so on, and throughout the Arab world. They refused and rejected appeals for opening up the system. Because ideally, democratization should happen slowly and over time. That reforms take time, that people need to learn how to practice democracy, learn how to live together and how to respect each other. But these regimes closed down the societies and refused to allow real participation or real freedom, even at a small scale. They, of course, manufactured this fear of the Islamic movements and Islamists. And they used it to justify dictatorship. That if we open up the system, the Islamists will win and the Islamists will come to power, and they are anti-democrats, they don't believe in democracy, and therefore it's better to keep us rather than have democracy. So for the last 40 years, if not longer, this fear of Islamism was used as an excuse to justify repression and corruption, which in turn was creating more and more violence and violent movements, because people were simply fed up and people had no choice, especially the youth, have no avenue or no way to participate, to express their opinions, to have a voice, or even hope for a better future. Youth was starting to lose hope for a better future. So this created the crisis that we now have in the Arab world. We're at a deadlock or stagnation for the last at least 3 or 4 decades, with authoritarianism being the only regime and the only game in town across the Arab region. And of course, as I said, extremism was a byproduct of these ruthless regimes, and the Arab people were forced to endure a reality that included both dictatorship and extremism on both sides. This, of course, started to change on December 17, 2010, when Bouazizi killed himself, burned himself in a desperate act, or act of desperation, when the whole world saw that, and he said, I don't want to live like this anymore. I cannot continue to live like this anymore. I need dignity. I need my freedom and I need dignity. And this is how it started in Tunisia, and then, like wildfire, spread around 5 countries. Within just 1 or 2 months, 5 other countries had similar revolutions. In Libya, in Egypt, in Yemen, in Syria, and of course in Tunisia. 5 countries. In Morocco it started also. The same thing started in Morocco, but the king in Morocco was a little bit smarter and quickly made some changes in the constitution to allow the people to choose their government. Because in the past, in the election in the constitution in Morocco, the people elect the parliament, it's true, but the parliament has absolutely no weight and cannot do anything. And the king appoints the government, not the parliament. So really the parliament was useless. But they changed this after the Arab Spring, after these revolutions, and so now they have an elected parliament that chooses or appoints the government. Anyways, so of course, what we are discovering right now is that it was easier to get rid of a dictator than to build a democracy. That building a democracy is not just getting rid of dictatorship or of the dictator. Even we didn't get rid of the dictatorship, we just get rid of the dictator, because the regime is basically still in place and still intact. And building a democratic system takes time and is extremely hard. Of the 4 countries that underwent these revolutions, or what is known as the Arab Spring, Tunisia has the best chance of success. And we believe this, and experts who know the region believe this and said this from the beginning, that Tunisia has, nothing is of course guaranteed, but has more chances or has better chances of success due to its small and homogeneous population, due to a large educated middle class, strong infrastructure, and long tradition of constitutionalism. As Abdelfattah Mourou mentioned earlier, Tunisia was the first Arab country that had a constitution back in 1861 or 62. And of course, women's rights are very well developed and protected in Tunisia since independence, since 1956. Tunisia has one of the most advanced laws in terms of women's rights protection in the Arab world. In addition to that, Tunisia, I think, has one of the most moderate Islamic movements in the Arab world, as we have heard just now from Shaikh Mourou. The Islamic movement in Tunisia since the 70s, and especially since 1981, has advocated freedom and democracy and said that they believe in democracy as compatible with Islam. At that time, very few Islamic leaders and Islamic movements agreed with this statement or believed that democracy and Islam were compatible, and many were very upset with Shaikh Mourou or Sheikh Ghannouchi when they said this back in 1981, that democracy is compatible with Islam, or that we want democracy in the Islamic world and in Tunisia. Of course, this has changed now, but Tunisia The party in Tunisia is one of the more moderate Islamic parties in the Arab world. So what is happening in Tunisia right now are the challenges and the difficulties of learning to live together, of learning to build a new democratic order or a new system of governance that allows for freedom, that allows for diversity, that allows for elections, where we learn to respect the results of the elections, that the majority has the right to rule. And the majority in Tunisia or in the Arab world doesn't mean 80%, doesn't mean 90%. The majority does not mean consensus. Majority could sometimes mean only 50% plus one. This concept we still don't understand it, that 50% plus one, is the majority. Still, some people think that majority means everybody has to agree, which of course we know is not possible. So in Tunisia right now, I think there is a national dialogue to try to build this consensus. There was a very big effort on the constitution. We have been writing the constitution, unlike in Egypt, where they wrote 2 constitutions already, but each one they wrote it in basically a month or 2 months. For the last 2 years, we have been writing the constitution in Tunisia. What takes time is not writing. Writing is easy. What takes time is the dialogue and the consensus and the negotiations and the participation of all the sides and all the people, even in the rural areas, even in small villages, that they have to have their opinion, they have to listen, they have to participate and discuss these issues in the constitution. So, to conclude, it takes time. We have to be patient. We have to understand that building a democratic order or democratic system cannot be done in 1 or 2 years. It takes, as Shaikh mentioned, perhaps 10 years, perhaps 20 years. So we have to be patient. We have to understand that these things require time. We also have to understand, right now a lot of people say, well, Al-Nahda made a lot of mistakes, or the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt made a lot of mistakes. Of course they made a lot of mistakes. They have no experience in governing. Of course they have no experience in governing. Because of the dictatorship that we had for the last 50 years, nobody has experience in governing, except the remnants of the old regime, for whom we had a revolution, against whom we had a revolution. The only people in Tunisia who have governance, experience in governance, are the crooked, corrupt people who used to rule Tunisia for the last 40, 50 years. So any party, whether it's Islamic or secular, that came other than the ruling party, they have no experience. So of course they're going to make a lot of mistakes because they're learning. And so we have to be patient and we have to build these compromises between all the parties. And we have to learn to live together. Islamists and secularists and everybody, we have to find a way where majority rules, but also the rights of the minority are protected, because the minority of today could be majority tomorrow. And so it is a learning process. It is a learning curve where we have to talk to each other, we have to listen to each other, we have to find compromises and build a mutual understanding and mutual respect. To conclude, this is extremely important, I think, for the region, because without success for democracy in the region, I think the region is going to go back to either dictatorship or violence and terrorism and perhaps even civil wars. Because I don't think the people in the Arab world or in Egypt or in Tunisia will accept dictatorship again. We accepted dictatorship for 50 years, or our parents and grandparents accepted dictatorship. I don't think the young people of today will accept another kind of dictatorship. So democracy is a necessity, but we have to be patient, and it is in the vital interest of the United States to support the democratic process in Tunisia and in Egypt and in the Arab world. And unfortunately, this support has been lacking in the last year or year and a half, especially since the Islamists came to power. The support of the United States is very, very weak. And I think this is a mistake. I think this is very harmful to the interest of the region and to the interest of the United States and to the interest of the European Union as well. So what is happening today in Tunisia and in Egypt and in the Arab world will define the region for the next 50 or 100 years. And I think democracy is not an option. It is a necessity. Without it, there will not be any stability or any development or any progress. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Radwan Masmoudi. Now you guys have the opportunity to go ahead and ask any questions you have for the Shaikh or for Dr. Radwan. Or if you want to share your thoughts about what they said.
What place to express my gratitude for Shaikh Mourou and all the way to address us. And I really salute Al-Nahda for their moderate approach and for what they are doing in Tunisia. But the question or the concern I have, what kind of measures do you have in place to prevent the fate that happened to the revolution in Egypt to occur in Tunisia? There is no doubt, as you mentioned in the lecture, that there are Salafi going to the extremes, and there are also secular going to the extreme. They are willing to crush Islamism. No matter what happened to the whole nation, they are willing to sacrifice the whole nation for the same agenda. What kind of measures in place that Nahda is taking in place to prevent the grim fate of the revolution that we see in Egypt?
الصوت العالي. اي بترجم الصوت العالي يعني حتى يسمع هو الترجمة.
English to Arabic is one thing, Arabic to English is another. So let me do my best here. أولا يا شيخ أشكركم وأحييكم لهذا الاعتدال الذي تتكلم باسمه في الحركات الإسلامية في تونس. وسؤالي هو ما هي الإجراءات التي اتخذتموها لمنع ما حدث في مصر أن يكرر في تونس؟ لأن هناك الكثير من يريد أن يقع هذا مرة ثانية.
على كل حال هذا السؤال الذي أشكركم عليه يفرض علي أن أشير أن بعض الأطراف سواء تعاملت معها تعاملا معتدلا أو تعاملا صلبا، إذا لم تقبل بك ستجد الطريقة لإبعادك إن كانت لها قوة. الذي فعلناه في تونس هو أننا أبرزنا أننا لسنا منفردين بالحكم، وأننا نرغب في أن نخدم المجتمع في مشروع يريده المجتمع، وأننا لا نفرض على الناس لا نمطا جديدا للحياة ولا نفرض عليهم عقيدة ولا نفرض عليهم سلوكا، وأن تفتحنا على الواقع يجعلنا حريين بأن نكون مشاركين في بناء مستقبل تونس. تعلمون أن هناك أطرافا لا تستسيغ هذا الخطاب ولا ترغب فيه. الذي فعلناه معهم وأبرزنا للشعب نيتنا الحسنة وحذرنا من هؤلاء حتى لا ينقلبوا علينا، وسندنا في ذلك هو شعبنا والمصلحة التي يجتمع عليها الشعب.
So first of all, I would like to thank you for your very important question, and I must point out the very basic fact that there are certain elements within the political arena who, if they don't accept you, will repel you and drive you away if they have the force to do so. What we strive to do is to come to terms with the fact that, firstly, we're not the only force in the political arena, and that we are not out to impose our way of life upon, or our beliefs, or new ways of life upon the locals of Tunisia. And our very openness to the reality on the ground is what qualifies us to participate effectively in the political process. we have demonstrated our good intentions to the Tunisian population, and our support comes from the Tunisian population. That is where we derive our legitimacy.
إضافة بسيطة أن الذي يهمنا في تونس ليس بقاء الإسلاميين في الحكم، وإنما استمرار الانتقال الديمقراطي بالشكل الذي يضمن أن تحوز تونس مؤسسات ثابتة تحمي النظام الديمقراطي. لذلك قبلنا أن نغادر الحكم قبل أوانه لنفسح المجال بعد ذلك لمؤسسات محايدة أن تعد للانتخابات القادمة، والحوار الوطني القائم اليوم قائم لتحقيق هذا الهدف. وتصور أننا نضرب مثلا للعالم العربي في حكومة تتخلى عن الحكم لمصلحة الوطن، ونحن ننتظر أن يتم الوفاق على رئيس حكومة جديد حتى تعين الانتخابات القادمة وندخلها كغيرنا، وليس يضيرنا أن نكون في أغلبية أو أقلية، لأننا سنساهم في تحقيق تأصيل الديمقراطية في بلدنا من موقعنا إما من الحكم أو من خارج الحكم.
I would also like to point out that what is fundamental to our political agenda is not the triumph of Islamism, but of democracy in Tunis. And our goal is to strive to build institutions within the country that will protect the democratic process. That is precisely why we have actually stepped down from politics temporarily, from the government, temporarily in order to create space for the building of these democratic institutions. Can you possibly imagine an Arab country, an Arab government that would step down in the interest of its own people from power? We aren't, our primary concern is not with being the majority or minority in Tunis, politically speaking, but to establish a realistic and abiding democracy.
Okay. Yes.
My name is, allow me to speak in Arabic if you don't mind. I'm originally from Tunisia. My name is اسمي خالد تريس من تونس. رحبوا بالشيخ ورحبوا بالدكتور. مرحبا بكم. I'm gonna translate also in English. So, I have a couple of questions. سؤال للشيخ وسؤال للدكتور. سؤال للشيخ، كيفاش تشوف المستقبل نتاع تونس؟ خاصة بالنسبة لنا احنا مقيمين في الخارج وعندنا اولادنا ونحبوا نروحوا بيهم من تونس وعندنا الناس نعرفوهم هنا في امريكا نحبوا نهزوهم من تونس يشوفوا تونس كما عشناها احنا صغار. My first question to Shaikh is, how do you see the future of Tunisia since once we are like originally from Tunisia, myself and I have other friends also, and we would like to go back to Tunisia, take our kids, our families and friends, and show them, Tunisia, how we knew it back in the time when it was a really beautiful country. And my second question to Dr. سؤالي الثاني للدكتور، صحيح انه لما قلت انه امريكا ما هيش قاعده يعني تساعد في تونس ولا مصر ولا العالم العربي، لكن مش شنو رايك لو don't you think يعني لو تتصورش اللي احنا لهنا اللي نعيشوا في امريكا ماناش قاعدين نعطيو في الصوره الصحيحه على ولا كما نقولون احنا نفسروا للامريكان معناها كيفاش الوضع نجم يكون خير في تونس. My second question to the doctor is he was talking earlier about the lack of support from the U.S. government, but I'm assuming, and that's my question to him, don't you think that the people who are originally from Tunisia or Egypt or from the Arab world who live in America, they should pretty much show the example or explain to the Americans what it needs to be done over there and how things are supposed to be over there, or maybe show the government over here that things could be better if we all stand together and try to do something about it. These are my two questions. شكرا. مرحبا بك شيخ. مرحبا بك دكتور. السلام عليكم.
الشكر بالنسبة للجانب الموجه إليه. أقول أن كيف أرى المستقبل كما يريده الشعب. الشعب اختار أن يعرض صفحا عن نظام الديكتاتورية الذي يظهر في الظاهر سهلا لكثير من الشعوب. بعض الشعوب تحبذ الديكتاتورية لأنها لا تتحمل مسؤولية كبيرة في تنظيم الحياة غير وينظمها بمقابل ما تتنازل عنه من حريتها. مثالها كمثل شخص تزوخ محلا، إصلاح المحل على المالك، لكن هو مطالب في آخر الشهر بأن يدفع ثمنا، فهو مرتاح من الإصلاحات لكن يدفع الثمن في آخر الشهر. نحن ننتقل من التسويغ إلى الشراء، إذن نحن مطالبون بترميم بيتنا يوما بعد يوم. سيتطلب من ذلك حرصا على بناء النظام الديمقراطي في بلدنا. لن نبقى مصفقين، سنصبح فاعلين. الديمقراطية تقتضي المواطنة، والمواطنة هي أن نصبح نحن مسؤولين عن القرار، ليس غيرنا هو الذي يقرر. ويمكن في بداية الأمر أن نخطئ في قرارنا، لكن ذلك لا يمكن أن يثنينا عن المستقبل الذي نراه. حضرتك تحن إلى ما كنا عليه في شبابنا. الذي كنا عليه في شبابنا ليس هو مثالنا. نحن كنا في شبابنا مضطهدين. أنا من الذين حرموا شبابهم، وهذا من الذين حرموا شبابهم. أنا لم أستطع أن أتكلم إلا بعد أن أصبحت شيخا عاجزا لا أستطيع أن أتحرك. ما الذي أستطيع أن أفعله؟ أتكلم فقط. قبل 40 سنة كنت قادرا على أن أفعل، لكني حرمت من الفعل. أتصور أن مستقبل الشعوب بالديمقراطية هو مستقبل فيه مسؤولية، والمسؤولية تقتضي العطاء، تقتضي البذل، تقتضي التضحية، تقتضي أن نعيش من أجل قضية، أن نعيش من أجل قضية ويرتاح أبناؤنا بعدنا ويجدوا نظاما يحترم فيه الإنسان ويكرم، ولا يهينه أحد بالطريق العام، ولا يعتدي على حقه في التعبير. هذا أمنيتنا وسنصل إلى ذلك إن شاء الله. ترانسليت هو كان هو ترانسليت واحد.
يسر عليه يا شيخ.
Firstly, the Shaikh has very poetic and beautiful classical Arabic, and my English will not even such beauty. So what he says is, essentially the future lies in the will of the people. In Tunisia, they have turned against dictatorship, and they have to assume responsibility and everything that it entails. Some populations, he pointed out, don't actually rise up to this responsibility, and therefore, in some ways, actually choose to be subjugated by dictatorships. Then he drew an analogy, which I didn't quite catch, but to the effect that we must restore our own house. It's as if
We're going to change from renters to home owners.
Indeed.
Renters are not responsible for the maintenance of the house, but they pay the price in rent. Now we own the home, so we have to maintain it ourselves, so it gives us additional responsibility.
Then he also addressed the idea that sort of the good old days in Tunisia, and he said, you know, in my personal youth, I was oppressed. He doesn't look upon his youth as the happy good old days. He rather says, you know, I was unable to even open my mouth until I became an old man, and 40 years ago I could do so, but I was forbidden from doing so. So he's looking to the future.
I think, to your question addressed to me, I think the Tunisian community in the United States, or the Egyptian community, or the Arab community, or the Muslim community, has a huge role to play. In convincing US, the American people, and the American policy makers of the necessity of supporting democracy in the region. This is a big task. But also in our region of helping to explain what democracy is, to teach people what democracy is, we have had the good fortune of living in a democracy, so we know how it works. You learn democracy, to me democracy is like riding a bicycle. You don't learn it from reading books. You're reading from practicing it. And because we live here, and we know democracy is not perfect. I mean, there are problems, there are shortcomings, but at least it has mechanisms of fixing those problems, of correcting itself and correcting the problems, and allows people to participate, to have dignity, to have freedom, but in an orderly fashion. You know, democracy is not anarchy. Democracy is not, you can do whatever you want. No, there is law, there is a rule of law, there is order. So I think that it is very important that we, as a community, get involved and participate. We are not spectators. I tell you very briefly, because it's not, we don't have a lot of time, but I came here to the United States in 1981 in a program called Technology Transfer Program. The goal was to learn technology and go back to Tunisia. It was funded by the United States to help Tunisia acquire technology. After living here for 12 years and getting my PhD from MIT in robotics, I discovered during that period that really what we lack in Tunisia is not technology. It is democracy. That the secret for US success or Europe success is democracy. Technology is easy. Some of the best scientists in America are Arabs and Muslims from all over the world. So we have technology, but we don't have democracy. You know what I did? I quit my job and founded the Center for a Study of Islam and Democracy. 15 years ago, not after the revolution, 15 years ago. Because I said we have to learn democracy. And we have to help bring democracy to Tunisia and to countries in the Arab world. And this is how we can really contribute to the development of our countries. And I think we all have a responsibility. Whatever you can do, everybody can do different things, but we have a responsibility to give back by helping democracy succeed in our countries. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for one, maybe two more questions. Go ahead, please.